At exactly 3 minutes past the hour, Buckingham Palace released a statement so unexpected and emotionally charged that even seasoned royal correspondents struggled to read it aloud. It was not about titles, protocol, or ceremonial duty. This time, the focus was on a child, the youngest royal, Prince Louis. Within seconds, televisions froze, phones buzzed, and a single question echoed across the nation. What could possibly be so serious that the palace broke its own silence for him? There had been no pre-briefings, no advanced rumors, no cautious whispers in the press. The announcement struck like thunder on a clear day, its timing brutal, its language deeply unsettling. Unlike past formalities cloaked in royal vagueness, this statement radiated emotional tension. Carefully crafted words that didn't just inform, they warned. Royal correspondents, hardened by years of curated news cycles, found themselves shaken. A few even stammered on live broadcasts, unsure how to convey the gravity of what they had just read. This is not a typical statement, one anchor admitted, his voice faltering. It felt human, painfully human. While the private matter concerning Prince Louis might have seemed mild in another context, in royal communications where every phrase is meticulously vetted, this was an unmistakable alarm bell. The phrase private matter suggested not inconvenience, but tragedy. Even without specifics, the nation felt the weight of what had been revealed and what had been left unsaid. What made the situation even more jarring was its focus. This wasn't about King Charles's known health challenges, an update on Princess Catherine's public recovery, or a diplomatic or ceremonial matter. Instead, the palace had chosen to spotlight Louis, an unexpected and emotionally charged decision that unsettled every tradition. Public reaction was immediate and visceral. Social media flooded with anxious messages, hashtags trended, and families paused dinner conversations, their attention drawn to the smallest heir, whose cheeky smiles once stole headlines. Across homes in the United Kingdom, televisions stayed on longer than usual, and everyone asked the same question. What could have happened to Louis? The backdrop of recent royal instability only heightened the concern. King Charles's frailty, Catherine's prolonged illness, and the monarchy's struggle to project calm had already left the nation emotionally raw. Now, with Louis at the center, it felt as if the very soul of the royal family and the country's sense of stability hung in the balance. The family was being tested in real time, yet while the world fixated on the palace's official statement, insiders recognized the story lay in what the message carefully avoided. As one observer noted, royal statements are engineered to conceal more than they reveal. But this one carried a tremor beneath its polish. Veteran palace watchers picked up on subtle shifts, softer phrasing, emotional undertones, and an unusual plea for privacy. This was not typical crisis management. It was damage control for something profoundly human. Behind the carefully chosen words, a private reality was already unraveling within the household. The monarchy, built on language that is strategic, precise, and meticulously curated, usually polishes phrases until all vulnerability is erased. Yet this statement about Prince Louis broke that pattern. It felt shaken. When the family expressed appreciation for the public's kindness, the phrasing, though simple, was almost a scream to those fluent in royal dialect. The palace only offers thanks when bracing for a storm. Concern deepened with the apparent lack of preparation. Senior aides, normally included in every high-level release, were reportedly blindsided. No drafts circulated. No memos issued. This wasn't just a typical royal communication. Tight-lipped protocol had taken over. The palace was in lockdown. Even the most connected reporters admitted they had received no advance notice, no leaks, no hints. In the royal machine, such silence is rare, and when it occurs, it usually signals that something has gone terribly wrong. Yet when reporters scrambled for context, they found a disturbing absence. No sudden hospital visits, no visible incident, just a heavy, deliberate message that something was unraveling behind the scenes. Theories spiraled, whispers reached insiders, and the name most often mentioned in hushed conversations was not the King or the Princess of Wales, but Louis. Reports of emotional distress, withdrawal, and behavioral changes surfaced, terms rarely associated with royal youth. In a palace notorious for image protection, the language now felt unguarded. There were no euphemisms, no vague nods to routine matters. Instead, the statement acknowledged exactly what the monarchy fears most, exposing raw human fragility. The decision to focus on Louis, so young, suggested a shift in strategy. This was no longer about preserving mystique, but about preparing the world for a deeper truth that could no longer remain hidden. Insiders began confirming what the public was sensing. This was not a PR maneuver, not optics. Something real was bleeding through the cracks of tradition, and in an institution built on silence, that was extraordinary. This kind of emotional honesty was as rare as it was terrifying. One source close to Kensington summed it up simply. They didn't have a plan, they just had pain. For William and Catherine, the illusion of calm was no longer sustainable. Inside Adelaide Cottage, their youngest child was struggling, and the cost of secrecy had grown too high. While the palace attempted to contain the fallout with vague reassurances, one voice was preparing to pierce the silence not with spin or strategy, but with a father's breaking point. Soon, that silence shattered, not because of advisors or officials, but because a father could no longer hide his fear. When Prince William stepped forward, there was no podium, no script, no shield of protocol. What followed stunned the world. This was not a future king speaking. It was a father standing at the edge of emotional collapse. His voice cracked, his pauses lingered, and in that moment, the illusion of royal invincibility disintegrated. He began not with formality, but with a silence so weighted that reporters felt the air shift around them. William, who had always carried himself with the composure expected of one born into duty, now stood raw and exposed, revealing a depth of vulnerability the monarchy rarely allows the public to see. Stripped of all armor, no titles, no rehearsed words, William stood with trembling breath and eyes that no longer hid the pain. Then came the confession. "Louis has been struggling," he said quietly. With those 4 words, the world understood that this was neither a misunderstanding nor an overreaction, it was real. He spoke of long months where days blurred together and nights were sleepless, not because of official duties, but because of small footsteps padding into his room. A child too scared to sleep alone. Louis, once the beacon of cheeky charm, had grown quiet, withdrawn, sometimes tearful for no apparent reason, at other times angry at shadows no one else could see. The illness that had ravaged Catherine had shaken the family's foundation, but it was Louis young, bright, and emotionally raw who bore the deepest cracks. William admitted he hadn't seen the signs at first. He had been trying to hold everything together, fulfilling state duties, managing hospital visits, meeting family expectations. He thought he was being strong, but that strength had come at a cost. He recalled evenings when Catherine was too weak to leave her bed, and Louis would wait outside her door in silent hope. Dinners where the little prince's plate went untouched, games left unplayed, and questions left unanswered. And the worst part, William confessed, was that he had believed silence was strength until it wasn't. The most devastating moment came on what was meant to be a quiet afternoon, when Louis crawled into bed beside him and asked a question William never expected. "Is Mommy going to leave like Grandpa did?" 8 simple, innocent words. Yet William couldn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because he suddenly realized the depth of fear that had gripped his son's heart. That question shattered something inside him. It wasn't just grief anymore, it was helplessness. William admitted that it was that moment, seeing his child confront mortality with wide, frightened eyes, that forced him and Catherine to stop everything: their schedules, their silence, even their public image. Nothing else mattered. He didn't hide his guilt. "I was trying to hold the crown and my family at once," he said, "but I didn't see what was slipping between my fingers." In that raw admission, the world glimpsed the truth: not a prince, not a public figure, but a father broken, remorseful, and terrified of losing more than just control. Yet while the nation absorbed William's words, the deepest heartbreak was unfolding quietly behind closed doors, where another truth emerged, one far more painful than any headline. Princess Charlotte, the steady presence often overlooked, had been silently carrying her brother's pain. When her composure finally broke, the family realized something devastating. Prince Louis wasn't just struggling, he was slipping into emotional isolation, and his sister was breaking alongside him. For months, Charlotte had assumed a role no child should ever be asked to fill. While adults whispered in hallways and carefully avoided hard truths, she quietly stepped in, becoming Louis's comforter, translator, and guardian in a house tense with unspoken fear. Her tiny arms offered reassurance. Her soft words shielded him from dread. Neither of them fully understood, but her silence was not strength, it was survival. Late one evening, the weight became too much, and a nanny found her curled in a corner, sobbing into a pillow, whispering words that pierced every layer of royal poise. "He doesn't understand why she's not getting better." Fragile and whispered through tears, the sentence shattered the illusion of resilience. It was no longer just about Louis's struggles. It was about what Charlotte had endured to hold him together. When the news reached Catherine, It didn't come from the press or aides, but in hushed tones from the woman who had witnessed Charlotte's collapse. For a mother still recovering, it was a revelation she was unprepared to face. Her daughter had been absorbing the sorrow of the entire household, carrying it not because she was asked to, but because she felt she had to. Normally, the signs would have been obvious, but the family had missed the most dangerous ones. The children weren't just struggling, they were adapting. Adapting to absence, to fear, to grief without a name. Louis had withdrawn completely. The boy who once erupted with laughter at breakfast, who played with toy soldiers and raced down hallways, had grown still, uninterested and unreachable. He stopped asking when Catherine would come downstairs. He stopped reacting when plans changed. He stopped finding joy in the simple pleasures that had once defined his world. The adult's silence, the endless strategy meetings, the forced smiles, the careful avoidance of truth taught him only one lesson. Something was deeply wrong, and speaking of it made it worse. In trying to shield the children from reality, the family had inadvertently given it more power. The quiet had become a monster, claiming not just one child, but two. Charlotte's breakdown wasn't merely a cry for help. It was a warning flare, an emotional siren too loud to ignore. And then came the moment that confirmed the crisis had reached a breaking point. Prince Louis vanished from daily life. It was an ordinary weekday until he didn't arrive at school. No explanation, no follow-up, just absence. Teachers were informed privately. Classmates were confused. Behind palace walls, a decision had been made that would permanently alter his life. The monarchy had quietly pulled its youngest royal out of public life. The withdrawal wasn't planned or part of a long-term media strategy. It was sudden, emotional, and fueled by fear. For weeks, Louis's behavior had worried staff, but nothing prepared them for what happened that morning. During a seemingly routine classroom activity, a fellow student asked, "Is your mom still sick?" The innocent question landed like a thunderclap. Louis shut down immediately. He didn't speak or cry, just froze before retreating into silence. By the time he returned home that evening, something inside him had fractured. He refused dinner, refused to talk, refused to sleep. Once a sensitive, lively child, even his spark had dimmed. The next morning, he wouldn't get dressed, wouldn't leave his room, wouldn't speak to his nanny, his father, or anyone. It was then that William and Catherine realized they had no choice. An emergency meeting was convened behind closed doors at Adelaide Cottage, just the two of them and their most trusted senior aides. The discussion was brief but heavy with consequence. This was no longer about preserving routine, it was about saving a child. William, torn between duty and fatherhood, pushed aside protocol, while Catherine, still navigating her own recovery, insisted on stepping in. No more waiting, no more appearances, no more pretending everything was fine. The decision was made. Prince Louis would not return to school, not until he was ready, not until the palace could ensure his emotional safety, and there would be no press release, no media statement, no crafted message, just silence and an absence that spoke volumes. Homeschooling was arranged swiftly, overseen by professionals who understood trauma, not just curriculum. His days became fluid, stripped of uniforms, ceremonial obligations, and pressure to perform. For the first time in modern royal history, a child's mental health had been prioritized above monarchy. Yet inside the palace, tension grew. Advisors whispered about optics. What would the public say? What would the tabloids speculate? Would absence draw more attention than presence ever had? The Wales didn't care. They had seen the fear in their son's eyes, heard his silence, felt his trembling, and watched him slowly vanish into himself. They weren't going to lose him, not to duty, not to headlines, not to the weight of a crown. Still, the isolation came at a cost. Louis wasn't misbehaving, he was unraveling. While withdrawing him from public life was a necessary shield, it wasn't a solution. Behind palace walls, concern deepened. The question was no longer about press or tradition, it was whether the little boy they knew would ever come back. An unexpected ally stepped forward when protocol failed and advisors hesitated. Princess Anne. She intervened not with press statements or ceremonial gestures, but with action. What she offered Prince Louis wasn't therapy rooms or royal routines, but something far rarer in the monarchy: stability without spectacle. It began with a quiet conversation between siblings, William exhausted and unsure, and Anne, calm and unwavering. There were no notes, no agenda, just truth. William admitted what no royal father ever wants to say aloud. He no longer knew how to reach his son, that despite their efforts, Louis had become a shadow in his own home. And listened, not as a royal, but as a mother, aunt, a woman who had seen how deeply silence can harm a child. She didn't offer a speech, she offered a solution. "Send him to me," she said. No fanfare, no cameras, just a quiet, deliberate relocation away from the constant noise of Windsor and Kensington. What gave Louis was not therapy disguised as royal responsibility, but freedom disguised as simplicity. Mornings were filled with small tasks: gardening, feeding animals, walking in nature. She didn't ask him to talk or explain. She just gave him space. In those early days, Louis didn't say much, but he showed up every morning. He showed up. The routine wasn't about rules. It was about rhythm. Predictable, grounding, human. Anne's estate became the one place where he wasn't the youngest royal, or the fragile symbol of a struggling family. He was just a boy allowed to exist without expectation. Slowly, change came. He began asking questions. He began to smile. There were setbacks, but they didn't shake the foundation Anne had created. Her approach wasn't soft, it was strong. Not in the way palaces demand strength, but in the way life requires it, the way broken hearts need it, and taught Louis the power of work, touch, and quiet. And perhaps most importantly, she made him feel seen without being observed. William and Catherine watched from afar, careful not to disrupt the progress. Their gratitude was quiet but profound, and for all her stoicism, understood what she was doing. She saw in Louis the same fire that once burned in Diana, the same emotional clarity that traditions so often misread as weakness, but she also saw the difference. Louis still had time. It was Anne's refusal to treat him like a royal project that saved him. She gave him a version of normal no title could provide. Through sweat, soil, and shared silence, he began to rediscover his footing. And just like that, healing began not in public, not for applause, but in the forgotten corners of the crown, where true strength still lives. Yet while Prince Louis started to heal, forces inside the palace were moving in a very different direction. Just as hope returned, a confidential document leaked to the press. Its language was cold, clinical, and terrifying. The memo didn't speak of healing, it spoke of containment, visibility reduction, and narrative control. And for William and Catherine, it was a stark reminder that the machinery of the monarchy rarely bends for human fragility. For Catherine, the leaked memo confirmed their worst fear. Someone inside the palace saw their son as a liability. Labeled internal use only, it was never meant to surface, but a staffer, disturbed by its contents, passed it to a trusted journalist. Within hours, it was everywhere, every network, every headline igniting a firestorm. The document outlined a strategy for managing the public optics of Prince Louis's absence: staggered appearances, limited visual coverage, and measures to reduce press speculation. There was no mention of his emotional recovery, no acknowledgement of trauma, only strategy, image, and silence. To the public, it sounded like censorship. To William and Catherine, it felt like betrayal. Insiders reported that William was incandescent with rage, demanding to know who authorized the wording and who had reduced his son to a PR challenge. Behind closed doors, voices were raised, doors slammed, and trust fractured. For the first time since the crisis began, William wasn't pleading for understanding, he was demanding accountability. Catherine's reaction was quieter, but far more lethal. When shown the memo, she reportedly called it inhumane, her calm yet sharp voice cutting through layers of royal politeness. She accused senior staff of hiding behind titles, while her child suffered in silence. Her words weren't meant for diplomacy, they were meant to wound. For her, this wasn't about duty, it was about motherhood. And it was Princess, and who delivered the final blow. In a private internal address, she tore through institutional walls with rare fury. "You do not contain children," she said, stripped of formality. "You protect them." The room, filled with senior advisors and royal handlers, reportedly fell silent. No one challenged her, no one could. In that moment, the monarchy's most unwavering figure had spoken not as royalty, but as family. Outside the palace, public anger surged, and the story became impossible to ignore. The media erupted. Hashtags like #ProtectPrinceLouis and #RoyalSilenceKillers flooded the internet. Editorials decried it as a modern-day cover-up, while mental health advocates condemned the language as archaic and dangerous. Parents saw their own fears mirrored in the Wales family's struggle, and for the first time in decades, the palace's obsession with control backfired spectacularly. What had begun as a personal crisis now exploded into a public reckoning. Commentators questioned how far the monarchy would go to preserve its image, and whether children born into the crown were truly safeguarded or being sacrificed. Pressure was relentless, the damage undeniable behind the gates of Buckingham. The institution reeled because the truth was unavoidable. No amount of silence could hide the cost of cruelty. No memo could erase the emotional fallout. No title could shield a child from being forgotten. With public scrutiny mounting and trust collapsing, the palace was forced into unprecedented action. After weeks of silence, Buckingham Palace finally spoke no euphemisms, no shields, just truth. In a statement that rewrote royal precedent, the monarchy admitted what it never had before. Prince Louis was receiving emotional recovery support. The illusion of royal perfection shattered in a single moment. The statement was brief, but it carried the weight of centuries. It didn't mask pain with phrases like routine adjustment or temporary absence. It acknowledged it openly. For an institution built on composure, this was a collapse of formality, unlike anything seen before. It read, "Prince Louis is currently receiving emotional recovery support under the care of professionals and his family." That line, printed on official palace stationery, echoed louder than any royal proclamation in recent memory. But it was what followed that moved the nation. A handwritten note from Catherine, short, vulnerable, and honest. "He is strong but young, and we are learning to navigate this as a family." Those words were more than a mother's plea. They were a declaration that vulnerability had a place inside the crown, that courage was found in truth. Across Britain and beyond, the reaction was immediate and deeply human. Parents saw themselves in her words. Strangers cried reading them. Thousands of families who had long felt invisible in their own struggles with children's mental health now saw their pain mirrored at the top of society. It didn't feel performative, it felt real and necessary. Mental health organizations responded within hours, some calling it a watershed moment, others a turning point in how institutions confront internal suffering. Campaigns launched, support groups expanded, and the ripple effect was undeniable. For decades, the monarchy had stood as a fortress of stoicism. Now, for the first time, it had become a symbol of shared experience. Commentators drew comparisons to Princess Diana, who had once stunned the world by speaking openly about her mental health struggles. Her son and daughter-in-law were carrying that legacy forward not as rebellion, but as evolution. Royal strength was no longer measured in restraint, but in release, in telling the truth, in showing the world that even the privileged aren't immune to hidden battles of the heart. The family, once criticized for silence, was now celebrated for bravery. And in that rare moment of transparency, the monarchy felt human. Yet just as the family reclaimed control of their truth, an external voice reignited old wounds. A photograph. Prince Louis, kneeling beside his mother, planting a flower, no crowns, no cameras, just healing. The image rewrote the narrative, silenced the noise, and reminded the world what truly mattered. It was not planned, not an official release or strategic media reset, but quietly leaked by someone close to the family, a small act of defiance, or a desperate plea for truth to speak louder than scandal. The image showed Louis not as a boy hidden by a crumbling institution, but as a child rebuilding through connection, love, and presence. Beside him, Catherine, still recovering yet steady, rested her hand lightly near his as they worked in the soil. That moment became more powerful than 1,000 public appearances. Within hours, it went viral. Not polished, not perfect, and that was precisely why it struck a chord. The public didn't see a prince. They saw a son, a brother, a little boy trying to find joy again. Headlines, chaos, and royal infighting faded because this image humanized him. The shift in public sentiment was immediate. Conversations moved from outrage to compassion, from critique to support. Campaigns erupted across schools calling for mental health resources for children facing invisible wounds. Parents shared stories. Therapists cited it as a national breakthrough. For once, the conversation wasn't about royalty, it was about reality. Even Prince Harry's warnings of generational pain lost traction. The public wanted healing, not rivalry. In Louis's quiet return to the earth, they found it. He became something no one expected. A symbol not of monarchy, but of resilience. His journey from balcony antics to emotional breakdown, from media scrutiny to a flower bed beside his mother, became a reminder of what children endure in silence, and what is possible when we finally listen. The Wales family, once accused of hiding too much, had laid themselves bare not with grandeur or perfection, but with truth. And the monarchy, for all its rigidity, had shifted, perhaps irreversibly. In that single photo, they didn't just protect a child, they gave him back his voice, his agency, and his right to heal. And as the monarchy confronts what this moment exposed, one truth remains unshakable. Prince Louis's story is no longer about tragedy, but but about the courage it took to finally speak.